Okay, folks, we're going to have to move at speed. There's quite a lot we need to get covered. We've only got, what, 4 sessions left, I think. Tonight, we're not on next Wednesday night, but we're on Saturday week, then the following Wednesday. And I think there's another session after that, and then there's one after Easter, I think. And then I have an optional one after that, which I may end up having to use. We'll see. We'll see how we're going. So, where am I? Right, I need to get down to where we were. And here we are. We get this stuff out. Just a little small change there. Yeah, and out and out. Now, I'm absolutely sure you're seeing that clearly. Yeah, figure as much. I even beefed up systems even further again. Not that it needed it, but doesn't matter. I'm not getting into that discussion again. Done and dusted. Right, we have quite a bit to do tonight. So I'm going to try and cover 2 sessions tonight. The first one being this reverse logistics. It's been around a long time under different names and guises and all that sort of stuff. But in any case, we'll start to plow down through this. Let's just focus this over here. Right, reverse edge. And I would imagine that you will have, oh yes, in your final assignment, do pay attention to this, or at least introduce it. Okay, I may not have explicitly said it in the brief, but it's within our remit to advise how to stay current with stuff. And I would suggest that whatever companies you have chosen, that you look at this element as well. It's become increasingly more important to companies, even if it is being offered as a service to an add-on existing product. But we're consistently looking at this whole area of circular economics, and in this case, it's circular supply chain. So what we want to try and cover tonight is the get an idea as to what reverse logistics is, some definitions by way of explaining what it is, how we can apply it, then describe the various recovery options in reverse logistics, reuse, remanufacturing, and recycling, which are pretty much the obvious ones. We'll pepper this with some examples as we're going through it. And then identify characteristics of remanufacturing recovery options and highlight the difference between forward and remanufacturing recoverable logistics environments. Okay, and then we look at the key success factors, or often referred to as KPIs, for the implementation of reverse logistics. And in many respects, this is really important, particularly in the context of offering a service to your customers. How quickly they can get something repaired, for example, and returned back out to them, that can be considered as part of the total order management system, which we will be looking at later on tonight. And what else? Finally, then we look at understand the performance metrics themselves and how relevant the recovery options are of reverse logistics. And again, customers are willing to pay for this, clearly. We virtually are doing it almost involuntarily nowadays when we take out insurances on our products and services and so on. So we expect a level of support, and this is true reverse logistics. Now, there are a couple of definitions, and this is one of the older ones. Nevertheless, we'll just have a quick sort of process: planning, implementing, controlling efficient, cost-effective flow of raw materials in process, inventory, finished goods, and related information from the point of consumption to the point of origin for the purpose of recapturing or recreating value or proper disposal. Okay, so interestingly enough, it's already beginning to break down some key areas in here. So it's not just sell it and be rid of it. I mean, that was the old way. Let's face it. In my day, it was you buy it, like it or lump it, that's it, end of. You jump through all sorts of hoops. Now, I had said previous as well now that one of the key governing aspects of reverse logistics has indeed been the European Union. and consumer rights. And that's one of the biggest drivers in this whole area. Plus, of course, companies have cottoned on to the fact that, this can be a real revenue generator. And I will always come back to the one example from 2001 going into 2002. When I did mention to you before, a colleague of mine set up the complete reverse logistics system for Dell. Jack Burke was his name. If any of you might have come across him or know him, that would have worked in Dell. But that was his sole brief. And that's why he left Abbott as their chief financial officer, Abbott Industries up in Sligo, to join Dell. And that was his brief. But we had worked many years earlier in Clover Meats, as I happened together as well. Anyway, and I always remember one of the comments he made to me. He said, "This was money for old rope. People are taking out insurance, buying the support services, but we already know. We know the performance." And this is back in early 2000s, for crying out loud, So metrics have come an awful long way, and this is why data and data analytics has become so important to feed into the various processes that you are propose to use, the strategies that you want to develop, whatever innovations. So unless you have the detail, show me the numbers. Don't get me started with COVID and numbers either. Anyway, if we consider this and move on here a little bit further and we look at some more definitions, and these are coming from APICS, which is the American Association of, it's essentially the supply chain management not-for-profit organization in the States. The Irish equivalent is IPICS, I think it is, which it's a follow-on from what used to be there, which was the Supply Chain Management, Irish Purchasing Materials Management Institute, which met its death in 2019 from memory. Went out, became insolvent. So there are two other entities around there today in that same space. Just double check. If you're in this space, if you're in supply chain or want to go a bit further, these are certainly worth looking at. The Supply Chain Management Institute in Ireland, IPICS, and then you have the Institute of Supply Chain Management, also in Ireland here. The other one, the IPICS, I'm pretty sure that was the follow-on from the Purchasing Materials Management crowd and so on. In any case, they're both affiliated to the APICS, as I call it, the Certification and Professional Development Organization based in the States. It's in Chicago somewhere. But a worthwhile qualification to have if you want to pursue supply chain management. Of course, you will have the other third level institutes and universities offering similar type course on supply chain and so on. Which would I opt for? Probably these guys, the APC, ICS and IPICS, simply because they're from industry practitioners. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Not that it doesn't matter. Anyway, the process, looking at these definitions coming from the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, again part of this APICS. Process of planning, implementing, controlling the efficient, cost-effective flow of raw materials in process, inventory, finished goods, related information from the point of origin to consumption to the purpose of conforming to consumer requirements. So you see already a little twist there in the tail there, conforming to customer requirements. And obviously things like if you buy electronic equipment, you buy a fridge, you pay a disposable fee and all that sorts of stuff to have it taken away and disposed of. It's already, sometimes these are passed on to consumers, other times they're not. Buying laptops, the IEEE and all this sort of stuff that goes on, where you pay a returns or collection returns type fee. Other companies have gone to the point that they will bring product to you, unpackage it and take away the packaging from your premises and so on. That's becoming very quite prominent as well. Again, because of the cost of disposing of stuff from an individual consumer's perspective and your waste bins and all that sort of stuff, bringing down those costs. Customers don't want it. Just give me the raw material or give me the raw product per se. And then the final definition, So the process of planning, implementing, controlling the efficient, cost-effective flow of raw materials in process management, blah, 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 and related information from the point of consumption to the point of origin for the purpose of recapturing value of the proposed disposal. So essentially, can we get back as much of this stuff as possible? And this even starts a little bit further in product design, product engineering, and new product introduction. Already these criteria are aspects are being built into product design. Most notably with Audi, and they are the most efficient in terms of reusable materials from their cars, primarily being aluminium for the most part. And anyway, that's the type of area we're looking at, the levels of these. That's a throwaway diagram. It's just a difference between forward and reverse logistics. Standard, just deliver the stuff out and then kind of bringing back some of the different aspects. You know, if you look at down here for the last one, for example, the visibility of process is more transparent when you're sending it out. It's not as transparent when coming back. So what's your reverse logistics process? So you can see things being made, and we have very solid information flows from the order right through to the delivery. But can we see, is there traceability from that going back? And interestingly enough, it's getting there, but it's not as visible. So for example, if you buy something today, you have the tracking ID. You can see a product coming to, when it's going to arrive, and so on and so on. When it's been purchased, when it's gone into production, out of production, into warehousing, into first, second, and third levels of distribution. But in the reverse logistics, we don't quite see that. It just seems to drop it off at a collection point, for example, or post it back, or arrange for delivery. We don't see the same traceability. So where is it now? Which is an interesting growth area in terms of, look how efficient we can be with our reverse logistics. We can let you know the status, because people are anxious. For example, if it's a piece of equipment and they need it returned, repaired, or whatever, how long does it take for that to come back to them, and so on. So having that level of the similar forward visibility, if that can be implemented to the same degree in reverse logistics, it will certainly give a competitive edge to companies in terms of. Now, of course, this might be minuscule, so we have to watch the trade-off. Is it worth our while to put such complex systems in place? Well, that will be dependent on your customers, which we'll look at later on tonight when we're talking about order management and customer service. So again, just coming back, looking at the generic reverse. So we have this traditional forward logistics process up above. You have the source of the raw materials, blah, 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 parts manufacturer, product manufacturer, out to market, and then goes to a customer. Collection, test, and redistribution then for the reverse side of things. So if we need to well, if you go into the market, this point here, the consumer has it. Something goes wrong, it goes back. It has to be collected. Testers try and evaluate how malfunctioning the equipment is or not. Do we put it back in to have it partially rebuilt, or do we send it all the way back to be totally deconstructed and remanufactured, or do we look at disposable, or possibly all three, depending on the type of product it is? You know, for example, this one could be redistribution. This could be a car engine that's going back for refurbishment, for example. You might send all the rest of the body and chassis back to source, or back to your previous supplier, the aluminium supplier in the case of Audi, and let them melt it down and reconstitute it. And again, they have to keep strict data on this because of the number of times aluminium, for example, can be reconstituted as a raw material, because its tensile strength does weaken regardless of all the different composites that they would add to the aluminium. There's a limit to its reusability. So we'd have to keep all that data, or if there are parts that are just simply have to be disposed of in their entirety or whatever. But in any case, it shows that there's a lot that has to fit into this reverse logistics side of things. So what were the motivators for all of these? Well, I mentioned already the legislation, government policy, and the green agenda. Anyway, the green agenda, but mostly EU and consumer rights and so on, that if people are not happy. And unfortunately, some of this legislation can be quite how would say, empowering for the consumer, and to a point that we find that in certain instances products and services can be offered, and you have a 14-day 30-day trial, return it without penalty, cost, and so on and so forth. That's how to say, a huge gamble for companies to want to take on those kind of offerings to consumers. But they'll only do so on the basis that, well, we know that we're getting maybe less than 1%, maybe 0.5% of our consumers are returning the products. It's not that they're making it difficult for them, but depending on what the product is and so on and so forth, people actually might not just want to engage in the inconvenience of having to return something. Oftentimes that can be the case, but they already know this. I mean, they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They have the data to show what are the probabilities of returns in these particular areas as such, or products. Economic considerations, that's fundamentally the how to say, not so much the trade-offs, but how cost effective is it for us to request returns. Now, there was one example I was looking at earlier on today, and I just had to laugh at it. It was about a company, if you make it producing orange juice and you're selling it in bottles, that maybe you should return the bottles, or incentivize, have a deposit on the bottle and return it. I said, for crying out loud. Sure, Jesus, we were doing that one. Let me say, freaking over 50 years ago. When you bought minerals, and you brought the bottles back to the shop, you got a couple of pence or whatever it is, on not only minerals but other bottles. So that stuff, that it's just a rehash of the same old stuff. But the point about it is, Heineken do an exceptionally brilliant job of this in Holland, where they do collect a lot of their bottles and reuse them, which reduces the cost of having to source new bottles and so on. So they just put in a very simple what do you call that? Disinfectant, whatever it's called. I can't think of the name of the process, but they just have something they literally clean out and all the bottles again, essentially, and reuse them, and it's extremely effective. But also, that kind of wraps into this environmental consideration, which is I have to grapple with this one, simply because of my own perspective on this. And is it just pandering to the Greta Thunbergs, or is it genuine consideration for the environment, or is it used as a trump card to say, look what we're doing for the environment, we're doing this. But if you note the order in which they're presented, you have economic considerations before environmental. Now, some people might even try to argue we should have environmental before economic. It's only a matter of opinion, and everyone has a different opinion on it. But fundamentally, when you're in business and you're shareholders and so on, you can guarantee that it'll be primarily economic considerations. And if we can capitalize on an environmental message, well and good. But anyway, that's a whole other debate on the green economy and that sort of stuff. So. And then the final one here, when we look at it in terms of the drivers, shift towards buying sets of services. Excuse me. And that was the point I was making. Well, it's related to the point. Returning products are paying insurance for products for support and maintenance. So all that service side of things, the fail safe that a customer requires when they buy products nowadays, it's almost implicit when we buy something that we take out. If you go onto any site, any electronic site, or any Harvey Norman, any of these places at all, you'll always see an option to pay for insure this, or Amazon are even offering it, and I think eBay have it as a default. But yeah, you actually have to tick the box to say no, you don't want it, one or the other. But just be careful that you're not paying for insurance that you don't actually want. But that's the service side coming in. So we can guarantee that a product will be replaced or returned to. A replacement product can be done in 3 days, 7 days, 14 working days, whatever the case may be. So they're the kind of services, or bring it to a particular store. Like if you go to PC World, they have their own dedicated help desks inside. Your laptop keels over, you can bring it in. They'll probably try and repair it there and then. If not, they'll say this is going to take extra time and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, they're providing that level of service. So there's a reassurance. And that's really fundamentally what the customers are looking for, that level of security. If all hell breaks loose, then someone can fix it for me, essentially. So those levels of service, that's what we mean by you're not just buying a laptop, but you're buying the support services above and beyond all the software that you're loading onto it. Excuse me. Excuse me. So the reuse refers to the process in which the recovered product is used again for the purpose similar to the one for which it was originally designed. Laptops, while I was talking about it. Can we reuse them? Of course. Companies and desktops and so on. Companies returning computers, other companies taking over older obsolete machines and refurbishing them and selling them on to schools, third world countries, and so on. So that's essentially reusing the product for its original intention as a laptop or a desktop and so on. Remanufacturing, process of reducing the product into its constituent parts. It requires more extensive work, often completely disassembly of the product itself. Most fitting one there could be in the car industry. Returning a car when it becomes obsolete, do you break it down? Now, of course, we would have traditionally the dismantlers, but some companies will take them back and dismantle and refurbish parts and so on, and sell them on as aftermarket replacements. And that's become quite popular because it reduces the amount of first-time manufacturers. When I say that, I mean each time engines are produced, they produce X amount above and beyond the actual car requirements, so they can have engines ready to be used for, in case of accidents or whatever, engine blows up and so on. Here's a replacement engine. So they're manufacturing the replacement products already. But in many cases, they can also put up a parallel process where they take back the engines and refurbish the engines, maybe change only some parts on it, and that reduces the cost of manufacturing of those original engines in favor of these refurbished engines. So again, do the numbers and see which is more beneficial to us and so on, or be able to sell at different price points. Here's a refurbished engine as opposed to a brand new engine. And let's be honest, if you had to replace a new engine or a gearbox and so on, we might say, well, could we get a good and a solid refurbished one at maybe half the price or 3/4 of the price? That's the kind of remanufacturing. So the components are already pre-designed such that they're more easily dismantled. Excuse me. And that's the whole point about it. And then of course the recycling process of collecting and disassembling used products, components and materials and separating them into categories like materials such as plastic, glass, etc., and then processing them into recycled materials. And that's what we have in the likes of Thornton and what are these other waste disposal places. So you have your different bins. So you do have your products broken out into that pure recycling. And of course you have your recycling centers. And then they start to grade the products and the different colors, different types of plastics. Those are washable, those are not washable. Can we remove the print and get back to pure basic plastics and restructure them or reuse them. Same for glass as well. Keep the colors separate from the whites. Yeah, it's like the washing. Anyway, so in the recycling then, restrictive environmental regulations and potential economic benefit have encouraged firms and municipalities to recycle. So the success of recycling depends on whether or not there is a market for the recycled materials, and then the quality of the recycled materials themselves. So of course it's as I said, you have your recycling. You take tires for example. It's a huge issue in terms of recycling, but it all comes down to what innovative ways companies can use recycled tires. Sometimes you might get them as get some more roadworthiness out of a tire. That's becoming even less and less popular. Others are using it for um, these playground mats and playground surfaces, horse running tracks, jogging, cycling lanes, and all that sort of stuff. So reconstituting, sticking it to the ground, and giving a bit more life to the products. So it all comes down to those kind of innovative ways of reusing materials from recycling. So the recovery options hierarchy. So reduce reduction, or resource reduction, reuse, remanufacturing, recycling, disposable with energy recovery, and then finally landfill. Now, of course, the disposable with recovery energy, that's your incinerators. As and they're talking about still trying to build one up in Dublin. I don't know where they are at this stage, and out on the Bull Island or whatever they call it, around that area, where all this controversy over the two chimney stacks are at the moment. There's something out there, and they're thinking of building it and turning into a recycle or an incinerator as such. There's a couple of them around the country. In any case, they do generate energy, whether it is heat or in some cases electricity. In actual fact, your landfills in the last 20 or so 30 years or so, they've been fitted with pipe networks for collecting methane and feeding it into the system. And that's why you will sometimes get that stench when you're passing it's the odd leak of that methane. But nevertheless, that's what they're doing, recovering energy naturally. So reverse logistics may occur in either a closed or open loop system. So now it will again try and work this into your chosen company on your final assessment. Okay. But a closed loop reverse logistics system, sources and destination sinks, or in other words, the users coincide that the flows cycle is in the system itself. So companies adapting the system collect their used products and either refurbish and resell or remanufacture them, or they recycle them. And Heineken be the kind of the case, except for the drink part. They don't collect that, obviously. And then so for illustration, here's an example of a closed loop reverse logistics system. So here you have the original suppliers feeding into the producers, who then send on to the distributors, and then finally onto the customers. And then you see the feedback coming from the customers, either back to distributors or back to collection points, back to recyclers, and can either go back for total reconstitution or go back to the producers for reuse. As you can see, you have and it's very similar to the forward logistics until you get to this point here where you have the reverse logistics again. Okay, that's a closed loop system. So in an open loop system, the flows enter one point of the logistics system and leave at another point. So companies using this system might assume responsibility for collecting and finding markets for their products, but do not use the recovered materials for themselves. I'm trying to think of a good example of that. So I'm stumped. I can't think of something offhand.
Like would sort of eBay's reconditioned markets, products be an example of that closed loop?
They
Sorry,
are the open loop.
open loop,
They would actually call them, yeah, because the original manufacturer would have sold them out, and eBay take them back and maybe sell them on as used items.
well, maybe not
That's
eBay themselves, but
yeah.
the
The,
marketplace or
exactly the people that are using the eBay platform as such.
yeah,
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 yeah. That would work. That would work definitely. And you will find that when you do go onto those sites, you will have a choice of having new or slightly used, for example. So some companies can buy back the products, do a small bit of refurbishment, and that's their whole business. Let's get the product. It used to be the case with phones as well. Phones used to fall into this category.
yeah. Actually, thinking of another example, I'm looking to get a laptop for my daughter. You can get them from a place called Green IT, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are office laptops that are returned or
Mm-hmm.
past their how should I say, maybe they're subject to a refresh cycle in an IT company
Mm.
or in some kind of business, and instead of being scrapped, they go back to these companies to be reconditioned, refurbished. So it's not
Yeah.
going back to the original manufacturer, the original supplier. It's coming back to a third party to refurbish and resell.
Absolutely, and buying those products, you're actually getting. Oftentimes, you're getting a cracking deal. You're getting much higher spec than you would if you were buying it over the counter new in the first instance. For the equivalent spend, should we say? And yeah, so yeah, you have those. Who else would do it? Um, PCs, phones, electronics, generally speaking. Trying to think of, is there anything in the automotive industry in that area? Um, yeah, well, we get the idea anyway in terms of having an open loop, so company can see, look for opportunities where they can say, you know, car fleets, for example. You'll have companies that Hertz might buy a new batch of cars directly from a retailer and use them for maybe 6 months or 12 months, depending on the category of car, and then offload the complete fleet at a reduced price. I think, did I see something there? Was it a month or two ago that Hertz were flogging off, several thousand cars? Great if you're in the market for picking up a car, but you would have, and sometimes you'll have a spin-off company that will do that for them rather than let it be seen that it's Hertz that are. So if they have created, Cashin's Cars, for example, and they say that's a subsidiary of Hertz, but not a lot of people can make that connection, then they can sell the price on car on us at a marginally higher price. Why? Simply because if I saw it was originally being sold by Hertz, the perception would be, those cars have had the crap driven out of them and so on, the rental cars and so on. So whereas if you kind of, I won't say, uh, how to say, trick the consumer, but slightly massage the perception by the consumer that Cashin's cars these are good quality cars that you're getting at a reduced price and so on. So even though they might have been driven before, but that's the kind of stuff that goes on, in terms of companies. In actual fact, you do see that a lot in car. It's not so much in the reverse logistics side of it, but when stock doesn't move, dealers move it around between themselves just to try and keep the perception of refreshed stock in their garage forecourts or in their showrooms. So they move it to colleagues or other garages, different parts of the country, just to create that perception that there are sales going on, so people see that it isn't the same car that's been there for the last 6 months or 3 months or even 2 months for that matter. So an illustration of an open loop, and it's exactly there as you can see. You have the collectors are separate entities totally, and then they look for secondary markets for their products. Exactly as you were saying there, Colin. That company, whatever it is, Green PC. There's another one called Swoopy.ie. I think they deal in electronics and phones and all that, and you can get really good quality products unblocked and so on and so forth for reasonable prices. Again, that's an Irish company as well. I see that cropping up every so often. So looking for secondary markets, but those markets can be locally or globally. That's the whole point about it. So the aspects to consider when comparing traditional and recoverable manufacturing environments, of course, the environmental focus, forecasting, purchasing, inventory control, and product planning and control and logistics. So when we're looking at all of this reverse logistics, what is it costing us to put this in place? And how much of our existing networks can we use? So, for example, if you're looking at the under logistics, when we're making deliveries, can these lorries collect also, for example? So, how can you get more efficiency out of your transportation system and so on? But this, all of this is fantastic, great way to work and so on. But you need to have the data. You need to be able to measure all of this stuff to make it worth your while, or just outsource the thing totally. Oftentimes, third-party logistics service providers do this anyway, and they'll have a separate company, and they can spot opportunities here to feed into this reverse logistics concept to be able to sell on products into secondary and tertiary markets and so on. So it's all predicated with having the data and ways of tracking it. The remanufacturing environment in reverse logistics, it's a supply and demand balance, okay? Accumulation and shortage of parts. So if you're right now, well, now is a bad example to be honest with you. We're being flanked by two major issues at the moment: COVID-19 and Brexit. Okay, so the combination of both are causing a lot of problems in supply chain. Needless to say, most of you or any of you involved in supply chain are most definitely feeling the pinches of these things. I was talking to a bike supplier there yesterday, and he said, forget it, we can't get anything here before 2022. So there's not going to be a half decent bike to be bought in the country, well, for the next 9 to 10, 12 months. That's just one product. But interestingly, I track the data, and I'm just watching what's happening. And we've heard all the horror stories, in terms of under the transportation, for example, products and container costs have skyrocketed. And if you think of even implementing reverse logistics into original manufacturing back in China and so on, forget it. It's just not going to happen. Way too costly for starters. So even though you might have it manufactured cheaply in those outsourced locations, you won't be returning them there. You might return them to a company here in Ireland. They might do something for you or have replacements. But what I'm finding really interesting is that the speed at which orders are still coming through from the likes of Wish and Alibaba and so on. Now, I'm not going to do much more investigation into it, but I'm seeing products coming to me directly for, in the space of less than 5 weeks, 4 and 5 weeks, which I would have normally said, wow, this should take about 6 to 8 weeks, and this is coming true. Yet, by the same time, other products are taking extremely long periods of time to get through, stretching out into 2 months, 3 months in some cases. And I did mention to you already the costs, the extortionate behavior that's happening in a lot of these ports in Taiwan and China and so on. People are exploiting it, and rumors of the shortage of containers and so on. I don't subscribe to the fact that there's a shortage of containers. There's not. There are plenty of them out there. It's just that they're dormant in many places because people just don't want to move stuff. They're unsure. They can't move products. Places have closed down. So it's a whole quagmire right now in terms of supply chain and so on. But at least on the upside, we've got a couple of more direct routes to Europe, and that's made a difference. There's always a silver lining. Look at the story with Musgraves last week and that UK company. And also, I'm going off on a tangent here, but the whole point about it having the right networks in place and transportation. So how can you leverage off your existing forward supply chain and build that into or build in some level of reverse logistics into that forward traditional supply chain? And that's fundamentally. So in other words, can we use our existing assets? So the external factors, again, for successful reversal, again, legislation, being forced to do it, or a compliance, and then of course customer demand and incentive. There has to be a strong incentive, of course, for customers to return products, or there's a very strong, healthy second-hand market for your products. These secondary markets could be anywhere. There could be a local flea market. There could be, a car boot sale, for example. I know that's the much lower end of the scale, but certainly having other markets in other countries can be a huge incentive, particularly where you're covering, at least covering your cost and making some levels of profit. Everything counts. Internal factors would again, of course, be the company's commitment to environmental concerns. Strategic cost benefits. So is it worth our while? Is it part of our strategy? Should we now look at our product strategies or innovation strategies to build in reversibility of our components and so on, that we can say, for example, if now this isn't the case, but let's just say Dell had an incentive to say that when you've come to 3 years or 5 years kind of end of life of your product and you like to refurbish it and upgrade it, we'll give you a replacement at a kind of reduced price. Send us back the laptops. I mean, immediately they're going to be taking out the chips out of it. Now, they may not be as powerful, but in another configuration, you could string together 3 or 4 chips and you have another powerful computer that you can offer to a small to medium sized business. If they pulled in 4 or 5 laptops with i5 processors, link them all together, and you have a nice little array system that could go in as in some kind of enterprise level for an SME, for example. But that's the kind of stuff, do we develop our products with those kind of visions in mind and so on. Most importantly, how easily they are to deconstruct. And there is a huge, huge market, certainly in the PCs and in the gamer world and so on, in building and beefing up their machines. Excuse me. And of course, then, do you have the resources? What resources? Most often, you will be working on a partnership basis. You won't start spending your own money and using your own equipment and so on so forth to do this. You more than likely will outsource to specialists or specialized companies in repairs and maintenance, for example. They could still be licensed under your product name, for example, such that the consumer doesn't think it's some lesser company that's fixing up or repairing their companies, but it can be done under license to Joe Blogs down the road and so on. But don't detract from your core competencies, building the products yourselves, just for the sake of having reverse logistics strategy in place. Really consider the possibilities of outsourcing or partnering, mostly partnering, and you will find that it's you will be partnering with third-party logistics providers, and in some cases these providers will already have identified some synergies with other companies for repairs and maintenance of products, which takes the worry off your plate, so to speak, but it's sold on to the customer as a complete system and a support system and so on. Integration and coordination. So again, performance measures and as shown in the data, customer satisfaction, service level, responsiveness, cost and quality. So you have 4 maybe of the generic performance objectives there from your last assignment, I think, raising their heads again, even in reverse logistics. So the cost and quality of and the perceived quality of the replacement product is, and because you know yourselves, if something breaks down, and if, for example, your car broke down and you had to have a replacement engine, does it actually feel the same to you? Sometimes you'll say, geez, it's better. But there will always be that element of doubt and elements. It's not quite the same as the original and so on. It's like getting the first scratch on your brand new car. Not that I would be familiar with that sort of stuff. But in any case, it's like getting your first scratch on your car. It doesn't feel the same afterwards. Same idea here. But you need to evaluate that. How important is this to the customer or not? And then evaluate. And how do you do? You find out, you survey them. And this is just an example of some of these metrics. Reuse, time required for product recovery. How long does it take, obviously, to get it back and repaired, remanufactured, the percentage recyclable, reusable materials available at the end of the product life itself, and then so on, so on. So these are just samples of the excuse me. Oh, jeez, excuse me. Of the metrics that can be taken to evaluate, is this worthwhile, or how much more effort should we be putting into reverse logistics? Okay, so folks, that was a whistle stop tour. How are we doing numbers wise? We have 33. By God. That's the first presentation done for tonight. How are we doing? Questions, comments, insults? No?
Interesting. No, it's very interesting. Thank you, Mark.
Not all, you're more than welcome. I'll tell you what we'll do now, folks. It's now 7:45. We'll take a break until 8 o'clock. Because I will try and have a small break in the next one. The next one is a bit longer than this one. Not to drive a stake through your hearts already. And I'll try and get rid of this hoarse throat. So I'm going to stop the recording now anyway, and I'll splice all these together anyway for whomever later on. And we'll reconvene at 8 o'clock. Is that okay, folks?
Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
Coffee break then. All right, folks. Talk to you then.
Bye.
Now we're back into the den of supply chain. Let me go down again to where I need to be.
Mark,
Yes, that's me.
a quick question on what you were doing there. The likes of Boeing taking back planes, is that a legal obligation on them, or do they do it for research?
Whole planes are crash planes.
Well, like when one crashes and they take it back or they ground all the fleet.
Yeah, you will find a lot of manufacturers do take back the remains of planes, or indeed almost all products. For example, I do know on again, I'll say this anyway. I shouldn't be, but my nephew, when he cycles, and if he has any mechanical issue with his bike, whether it's at home here while training or when he's on world tour races. If they have a crash, the bikes are collected and all parts are brought back to the manufacturers. Most recently, Canyon had an issue with one of their cyclists. The handlebars, one of the handlebars broke in the last kilometer, 2 kilometers, and they would have taken back the bike to assess what could have caused this, and they had to put out a stop use message to all cyclists that would have bought similar type bikes and other professional teams not to and private individuals as well, not to use the bikes until they found out what the cause of the fault was. So most definitely they will take them back to try and analyze, not only to find the cause of the fault, but obviously to come out with a fix and feed that back into their research departments to find out to develop more robust parts of whether it's a plane, car, bike, or whatever. So yeah, it's in their interest to yeah. To answer your question directly, yeah, there is not necessarily a legal obligation. With the case of planes, it's slightly different now because that's a crash investigation. But after that, it can be released, and when they find out what the causes of it, so the manufacturers would be most definitely involved in the investigation, in terms of as a backup to the investigators themselves. My stepson's wife, her father in Poland is a crash investigator as well, and they bring in the companies to explain the structure parts and so on, and showed records of the testing that would have been done on various parts so as they could possibly either eliminate or identify that as being a cause to the crash itself, where something malfunctions. So yeah, as for legal requirements, I can't honestly say, but generally speaking, it's in the company's best interest to get a solution, find out what the cause and the effect might have been, and if only for a damage limitation exercise such that they don't lose customers and customers don't lose faith in the products themselves. Okay.
Thank you.
Not, I hope that helps a little bit. Okay, folks, we're as I said, we're moving at pace, and tonight now again, this comes in two parts, so we'll take a bit of a break in the middle of this as well, um, to maintain sanity, if anything else. What we're going to look at now is order management and customer service. So you can see again, obviously there is a linkage between reverse logistics, but it's all built into this part of the customer service, as you will see. So what we're going to have a brief look at, the management and customer service, the concepts and the relationships between them, the actual order management generic system itself, customer service, and then order management, how it influences customer service in terms of lead times and so on, and the in part reverse logistics, which then comes down on the next point in terms of the service recovery itself. So in other words, how do we recover the product? What's built in to fundamentally give a level of reassurance to the customer of the product, that it's designed and built for its intended purpose. If it fails, we'll look after you and give you back something or replace it, and so on. Now, the introductory slides onto this are pretty generic, and this is probably one of the better models for supply chain management. Again, the supply chain operations reference model. As with everything, we have models for everything. We have models for Six Sigma and for CMM and for quality, and indeed we have them similarly for supply chain as well. So at least it gives an agreed set of standards to which companies either apply and sign up to demonstrate their effectiveness or their compliance to various processes and procedures. And ISOs, for example, would have their own sets and subsets based on the different manufacturing industries that you would be in. Well, similarly here, you have the same process here. So you have the various levels. That's just a chronological example, and as you can, it's relatively new. It's not, it really only came into in existence around the mid-90s, thereabouts. But that would have been driven because other models were up and running at that stage. You would have had capability maturity models. You had ISO, which was beginning to revamp itself. Before it was just a simple quality checking mechanism. Then they had to they realized that, hang on a second, this isn't good enough. We need now to look at the processes themselves, and that became the core objective. And as with everything else, it's all about the process. And the process can evaluate whether you have good raw materials or not so good raw materials, and then of course the output, the deliverables, are all as a consequence of a process or a sequence of processes themselves. So that's all this is saying to you, that the various versions, and around the it was 2000, ISO 2000 came out. That was a big revamp. There was another subsequent revamp of ISO as well, looking at processes and customers' gains and pains and so on and so forth. And again, this is just a top-down breakdown of the structure of the SCORE model and how it looks at whether we source when we source from suppliers, we make it, the process itself, and then of manufacturing, and then the delivery, the distribution, so on. So there's quite a bit in that graph. But as you can see, you can have your strategy and innovation, between do you want to acquire suppliers or acquire distribution networks and so on. That's just basically to see what do we need to do to put in place an effective supply chain for our customers. What kind of strategy, what kind of innovation or approach, and what are the cost drivers, for example, unit costs and supplier costs and store location. So there's a whole gamut. So this covers a multiplicity of elements in the supply chain itself. So it's very high level as such, but as you can see, it brings you down into the nuts and bolts. What else do we have inside? Goes without saying, information technology. This is really how this whole SCORE model matured itself, was because technology enabled it. If we didn't have the technology, none of this stuff would exist, and we'd still be doing the same old, same old. But the fact is that we do have the likes of SAP and ERP systems and software as a service, for example, here, e-business. All of these acronyms are names for the different technologies that have merged to enable us to have a more holistic view of what's happening right across the supply chain. Now we have the you know, from you know, was it to something to fork? What's the expression? Traceability of foods. Is it farm to fork? Is it, or something like that? Yeah. So that, you know, without having the technologies in place, none of this would make sense at all. You just wouldn't have the resources to do it. And again, we come back to the green strategy as such. Is there anything you might supply chain performance? Okay, and these are just the metrics: supply chain, education, training, culture, development as such. So the move to and all of this was happening as the traditional functional areas started to merge under the umbrella of supply chain management. You know, pure manufacturing, inbound logistics, outbound logistics, and so on, so on, so on. All of those, and you know, your purchasing department and sales and marketing and sales, all these. So as a consequence of the technology enabling us to integrate more effectively, now we have the as I said, supply chain management as a complete field in itself. Here's just another way of looking at the same model as such. You know, the flow between the different high level elements of the score model. And where do we have here? Returns. And again, as you can see, return deliver, return source. Again, this is where you begin to see the circular effect of the reverse logistics. So it's already built into the score model. Just moving on for you probably if you can see that, well and good, because I'm looking at the screen, I can't even see it. It's just a very crowded racetrack of the score model itself. So it's a way of evaluating. So like everything else in business, when we want to evaluate you know, whether it's a Six Sigma and so on, so forth, we have a suite of processes under each of these sections. It's like a project management system in a circular format. So you start and you develop and you execute, you feasibility, execute, and then you deliver it, and then you get feedback. And what they've done interesting is they've shown it as a loop, so it's a complete feedback loop as such. Now don't let me confuse you with a closed loop and an open loop system, not the same thing, but in terms of the model, it's a closed loop. So we can see we can have traceability. You know, some parts might be going off to other elements or other companies outside your own company, but in the bigger picture of things, it is a bigger closed loop. So products are getting reused, dismantled, refurbished, being used, repurposed as you know, other entities might consider. So you have the score execution, and you have the deliverables, as they call it. You know, what do we expect in these phases and these processes? What's the output, so we can measure it to see how compliant or not, or where you fit on the score model in terms of maturity. Again, the interesting, this is a not-for-profit organization, this APIX, so there are no vested, and this is just a collaboration of supply chain professionals across the globe who've agreed on this. I suppose almost in parallel with this, the evolution of the score model, you had the evolution of the Project Management Institute. So literally back in the late 90s or early 90s, thereabouts, when it started to raise its head, you could just pay a fee and you became a Project Management Institute member and all that. Now it's evolved that you have to pay an annual fee, you have to have a serious diary of what you've worked on to make sure you hold your accreditation as a PMP, Project Management Professional. So this is where these are evolving. So in other words, are you part of the club or not? And if so, we have our own criteria for being a member of the club, and as a consequence, you have all these benefits and they share knowledge. You have in here these guys produce white papers at the rate of knots. You know what's happening, best experiences, best practices. But also, in the Project Management Institute, they have PMBOK, which is known as the Project Management Body of Knowledge, and these guys would have something similar. So again, you have access to a lot of knowledge, shared experiences, and so on. So you can download. There's a lot of white papers. Most of the stuff is free anyway, and this stuff. But coming back to the order management, now that we have the score out of the way and what it kind of means, it does kind of feel, you'll see where the order management fits into elements of the score model later on here. Where's my controller? Oh, here it is. So if we look here at the two phases, as they call it, of order management. So you have the receipt of the order, fulfillment, and the order shipment as such. That's a very basic overview of the order management. And in phase one is organization attempts to change the manner in which customers places orders. Now that's important, and more so today. Why? Because if you don't have an online presence or a channel, then you're missing out on sales. So you have to have multiple options for customers to be able to access your products. That's fundamentally what it comes down to. As we say, channel management, our customer channels. How do we get our product to the customer? But equally, customers have to be able to access you as a manufacturer or your distributor, whatever the case may be, to be able to buy your product. So whatever mechanisms you have in here, whether it is direct online, whether it is by phone, whether it is an email, or what else would you have? Some reseller, some aggregated site like hotels.com, for example. Any of these mechanisms, these are the influencers on the order. So the more, and again, when the order is being placed at this stage, how can you influence the customer? How can you get them to finally push that button and purchase the order? Now again, there's some fantastic little tricks, and one of them PayPal Direct, for example. So you go in PayPal, you like the product, hit the button, bang, 2 clicks, and the deal is done. Wish, you go in and buy your products on your Wish account, and down you just swipe across the bottom, you have your PayPal card linked to it, or in some cases you might have your Revolut card, or these are all very cleverly thought out mechanisms to influence the ordering. And Wish have the thing scrolling across at the bottom of your phone or laptop or whatever, purchase now, and one swipe, and everything that you clicked purposefully or accidentally into your wish list or basket gets bought, and it's all done, and all you do is just you get notifications and blah blah. So that's they go into the execution phase. So the influencers are extremely important in the order management. And if we look at it here, the customer service is anything that touches the customer. Okay, so touch points often referred to. How do we influence the customer? Is it through your Instagram, Facebook, online, your web, PC, phone, whatever, Facebook, all of these different platforms acting as mechanisms or touch points to the actual customer. And then, of course, elevates the customer service to an organization-wide commitment. So customer service as a philosophy. So you're driven. This is kind of borrowing from TQM, where, as I said, TQM, Total Quality Management, is a philosophy. It's a mindset. It's not a process. And same here, putting the customer first. You'll have all these mechanisms in place. You'll have all these processes and so on, and CRMs and with C# in place, but are your staff customer focused? Are your processes customer friendly? So having that mindset, everything, putting the customer first is, often one of these throwaway comments. Oh, we put the customer first. Yeah, show me. What kind of, for example, the information flows, the product flows themselves, the cash flow, what kind of deals, or what way do you expect the customer to pay for these systems, and so on, so on, so on. So customer service as an activity then treats the customer service as a particular task that an organization must perform. So what do we put in place? How do we make it easy for our customers to interact with the firm? And more importantly, when something goes wrong, particularly in the service sector, what do we do to rectify it or remedy it and keep the customer at least as happy as when they first walked in the door or booked the service. And this is just a nice little matrix where it shows, the relationship between the order management. Now up here you have this, as I mentioned there, customer relationship management. Not necessarily only a piece of software. Now there are, I say probably one of the better ones out there is certainly Microsoft CRM. It's very, very powerful. It's an exceptionally powerful database which can go in and sit on top of your SAP system and so on and so on. That's one of the better ones out there. I know Oracle have something out there as well. There's a whole plethora of smaller things out there and more dedicated, like, depending on the industry you're in. But fundamentally, they're only the tools that enable it. So they'll give you more insight, depth, and knowledge about your customer. It's what you do with the data and do with the systems to make them more effective for the customer themselves. And again, if you make it easy for the customer, these front-end facing touch points can be extremely powerful. And that's why I use those examples of, swipe across the bottom and bang, that's a CRM system essentially in operation. One click, one buy, and if we don't have time to do a poll now or anything, but I guarantee if you had a poll here, how many of you actually link your bank card or your credit card to your Amazon account or eBay as such, or even Wish for that matter, or Alibaba? If you had a choice between linking your actual bank account card or your bank card or using PayPal, probably the majority of you would be using PayPal given the choice. Why? Because there's a level of security. If you don't get the product, if something is wrong with it, PayPal interacts. Amazon likewise, because you're paid by PayPal, you have immediate, the customer, the reverse logistics with Amazon is phenomenal. I told you I had an experience of that maybe 2 years ago this summer, where a product had the email sent out to me with the address code and barcode and return thingy. All I had to do was cut that out, stick it onto the original packaging if I still had it, which fortunately I had. So they had the product, replacement product from the original supplier, which I bought through Amazon, paid with PayPal. They had a replacement product in the post to me, and it was actually with me before I sent back the original one 2 days later. And I in terms of customer service, precisely this area, I was I was impressed. Let's just put it that way. So the service recovery down here, as a philosophy. So we're looking at the order management versus customer service. So order execution, how quickly we get the product. Now this sounds easy, the order execution, but there are so many things that trigger a sequence of processes from the time you place the order to actually get the order into the system then notifying, the pickers or the warehouse and the locations of the products and how quickly you can get them into your packaging, or start the process of assembling components and going through multiplicity of different production processes synchronously and asynchronously. By the time you have the end product available, take for example your Dell computers, and you go through that and you place your order, all of these so many different processes kick in. That's fine insofar as you have visibility of the processes. It's what happens. The less automation you have, the more downtime you'll have between each of the processes, and that can affect the order execution because that can introduce error. And indeed, if you don't have sufficient technology during the order execution, things can get mixed up. It happens, and unfortunately. But again, as an activity, it has to be focused. And again, that's why we have all these performance metrics at the different levels of each of the process executions. Oh dear, I know. So the order management, so influencing the order customer relationship management, and then executing. They're the two core elements of the order management itself. Persuading them to buy. Sometimes you'll have your system will have to facilitate customers coming, in other words, reviewing, coming onto your site, coming on, looking at the product, backing away. They might look for quotations, they might look for so on. how easy do you make it? How friendly is it for the consumer to get as much data above and beyond what might already be available on the website itself? So can I get some more pictures? Can I get some more details? Can I get more specifications about the product? Will it do this, 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 and this? And oftentimes we have, our chatbots, or we'll have our FAQs, and there's a bit of a shyness about those as well. People say, oh, geez, do I have to trawl through all of these things? And so how user friendly can these actually be? And that's just as the order influencer at the front end on your CRM system. And then, of course, once you've satisfied the curiosity, should we say, then we go into the execution and the order management. So here again, the CRM would say, how does the customer order, how much of the quantity, what they're ordering, when do they actually, from the time they come onto a site to the time of actually making the purchase. That's a metric in itself, So the conversion time, for example, can be a key issue. So align the suppliers' resources with the customers in a manner that increases both customer satisfaction and supplier profits. So in other words, you want to be able to trigger the processes with your suppliers based on the volume and timing of the purchase from the customers. So not onto, and how you manage that. So you don't want them all coming together at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning and then issuing out orders. Most likely not. You might want to be able to spread it out and so on. So you can incentivize that by having special deals and spreading it out over the week and so on, for such that you have a more continuous flow of orders, which then triggers your production processes and also obviously your purchasing processes to your suppliers as such, because all we want in once we get into execution is stability. We want to have stability and continuity, and we don't want the bullwhip effect kicking in. So maximize the efficiencies of the shipping organizations and logistics networks themselves. That's the part of, of course, when you trigger suppliers and trigger the process, invariably you're triggering all of the transportation logistics elements as well, sourcing the raw materials and making sure the quantities are coming in time to match the supplier, the customer demand. So that's your CRM. So if you look at it, breaking it down into these 4 basic steps, and again, this is it's actually an exercise I'm doing now with an IT company, and segmenting your customers. And again, you will need the data to be able to do this. Now, of course, you could sit down and troll through invoices and delivery notes and stuff like that and a spreadsheet and get around it that way. But more efficiently, if you have a suitable CRM system, then you can start to segment your customer base, and that way you can match the level of service that you want to give to the different customer types. And again, you'll have to define the criteria. Now, this one here, you're looking at profitability. The whole point about it is to have the most efficient level of service that matches the type of customer you're using. That's why we segment the customers. So using techniques, and so one of these techniques, activity-based costing, and then cost to serve. So when we have a look at the activities that are required for each of the customer types, then we can identify how much is it costing to serve each of those customers. Now can we compartmentalize this? Now, and then the rest goes down, measure performance and continuously improve once you've done step through these 4 points. To make this understandably very simple, this is for all intents and purposes like doing your Boston matrix. What your Boston matrix, your cash cow, your rising stars, your question marks, your dogs, and cash cow, rising stars, question marks, and dogs. If you're in the dogs situation with your products, get rid of them. Either diversify, kill them, whatever you have to do, because they're costing you money. Obviously, then you have rising stars. Do they move into? Do become question marks? Do we continue with these or not? If you don't want to continue, the question mark could drop down into a dog, or it could go across into a rising star. and then become your new cash cow. So that's the kind of flow. This is exactly the same thing that we look at these customers. Now, here's the beauty about all of this. It's not static, it's dynamic. Things can change. And, for a whole myriad of reasons, what might be seen as, really powerful or strong customer or good segment to be, for whatever reason, it could be a geographic thing, could be a change in currency. All of a sudden their currency is devalued in that particular geographic location, then they fall from grace. They're not as profitable as you might think they are, or fuel costs could go up, and making the cost to serve into these geographic locations becomes higher, and therefore they're no longer in the cash cow side of things, or as I say here, in the high profit end of it, they become less profitable. So what do we have? So we have to be monitoring all of these elements of the cost to serve to see if we still need to tweak each of these segments or move customers around, or what do we need to do to change how we're serving each of these customers. And this is just another example, or an example of the relationship management, as I say, influencing orders. I'm not going to go through all of it. So offer the same product service to each customer segment. So if you just have a flat offering to all of them, well, it's easy for the supplier, of course. The cons would be assumes that all the customer segments values the same types of supplier offerings. So, for example, if you're in let's just say we're in the IT business, and some IT companies say, well, we have to have this service and we need it immediately, and others might say, well, we're not that pushed about it. We're not in a real-time environment, therefore the level of service is we can wait for a few days, or so on and so forth. So you need to know that sort of stuff, and that's the kind of thing we're really looking at here. And for example, in lead times and order fulfillment rates, some entities have need to have a very high fill rate, others they're not so pushed about it. It depends. Again, these will all come in, and Colin, you can correct me on this, but these would be elements that will fall into your service level agreement, in terms of what's acceptable. If you look up here, for example, defects, quality or product defects, what's acceptable and not acceptable. And if you say, for example, if you're in customer segment C and you say 10 to 15% defects, well then can we have a suitable reverse logistics system which can take back these defects and replace us with their items. You might find that these could be retail items that have a long shelf life. Therefore, and if you're looking at 14 day, if the shelf life was, we'd say, 20 days, 50 days, 60 days, then you could accept a 10 to 15% defect rate, because you have a turnaround time, order lead time of 14 days. Therefore, anything that's defective that can't be put on the shelves can be replaced within 14 days, because we know the rate at which the products are selling at, and so on and so on. So if your sales cycle is longer than the order fill rate, then you could potentially take a higher defect ratio, and thereby reduce the costs of serving that customer, and indeed the customer might get it at a slightly reduced price because they're not putting strain or pressure on you as a manufacturer. So you see where I'm going with all this. All these perspectives or elements come into play in terms of determining how you want to play or serve your customers. And here's a slightly different version of the so if you vary the service offerings for each customer, meets the needs of each segment, and difficult for the supplier to manage. That's the all. So all you're doing is, when you're segmenting like this, is you're taking on more work as a supplier. But the benefits are huge in terms of how you're managing your customers, because you can then find that I can target more precisely those higher profitable customers. They could be as narky as BJs. They could be the most difficult whingers under the sun, oftentimes here, I know, but they can be difficult to deal with. But nevertheless, they're profitable. So you put in that effort. Take diplomatic lessons when dealing with such irate customers as such. But it can be extremely profitable. So you'll have to put in that extra effort, whatever the case may be. As I said, it's, credit hold if, customer segments be less than 48 hours. And then, of course, then you have segment C down here, order fill 88%, order processing through the web. So that's, you can only order through our website and so on. Now that's, I have a bit of an issue on this, and it's simply because you're beginning to notice, and oh God, geez, we're only halfway through these lectures, and I'm still talking about bikes. But Canyon Bikes in Germany, they have the bikes made in Taiwan, and they do some final assembly bits and pieces in Germany, and you only buy them online. Okay, and the problem with it is the reverse logistics. What happens if something goes wrong? People are without a bike for weeks, if not a couple of months. You don't want that happening in the month of May or June when you're in the peak of the summer season and you're enjoying yourself. But nevertheless, they can sell more cost effectively directly to the public. In other words, they've taken the Dell model and used it for bikes. And you can only order through the web. Many companies have gone down that route. So all customers are treated, general customers are treated that way through the web as such. And but their order fill rates tend to be much higher than 88%. They're usually ahead of time because of the way of their production schedule. They have the data. They know they can fulfill the order probably 95-98% of the time ahead of schedule, and therefore the order fill rate can be quite high. But so yeah, that's the point on this. So if you're only doing the web but even the websites now, as I said, have have some level of interactivity insofar as they might have the chat box coming up here where you will actually talk with an individual, even though it's through WhatsApp. And all they're doing is just borrowing on current communications. How are most of you talking? Is it through WhatsApp or email or whatever? So you're just using social media platforms, and these are the same things built in to the website itself. Sometimes they can be a little bit overly automated, but nevertheless, you know what I'm talking about. And here's just the cost, the activity-based costing. And as you have your traditional accounting. So you look at your resources, the department cost centers, and allocation of each of these tasks as such, and then attribute those to the product. So you get so accounting costs greater than or equal or less than the actual cost. So cost pool mirrors organization chart, and so on. So that used to be. That's what I used to do before I went into technology. I was in the cost accounting side of things, and this is how we used to do it. But then we moved into a nicely complex version of activity-based costing, and I'm an absolute stalwart and believer in activity. Show me the money. How much is it costing me to do this? And it only replicates what we generally do in life anyway. How much does it cost to build a house? Break it down. Show me how much did the foundation would the foundation cost, and so on and so on. So you break it down, and how long is it going to take? What's the labor and materials cost? So you break it all down into this. It's extremely powerful. So accounting equals the actual cost. So the accounting. So you're mirroring more directly what's actually happening. Cross-functional drivers trigger resources, and the driver's cost drives the cost to the appropriate level. So again, if you're looking at the segmentation and you're looking at the cost to serve, that's by far the best approach to take. An activity base. How much does it cost? What are the steps? Break down everything into its small chunks, into the activities, the processes. What does it cost me to run each of these processes? So you're taking the actual time and materials used, multiplying by the labor and cost per hour, and there you have an activity-based costing system put in place. Extremely powerful, but it'll give you more reflective, accurate numbers. And again, it makes it easier to tweak them. Now, I'm not going to go through this this flow, as I call it here, flow of costing for distribution center and so on, but it gives you an idea when you get a receipt of an order for pallets, and you have to go into storage, and then you have to go and pick the different bits and pieces for the pallets or for the cases, and then you have to ship them, and so on and so on. So that it's just a breakdown of the costs but it's indicative of the activity. So you literally have to produce a process map from the time of order. A lot of this will be, and we don't see it because it's automated, a lot of the stuff. But where you have precise activities, you can cost them. That's the key to it. Where am I going here? So customer profitability analysis, this really is just going back to what I say, traditional accounting. So the cost to serve now becomes the key driver. If you look at it, it identifies many other cost drivers that are impacted by customers and how they interact with the shipper themselves, the purchaser. So that cost to serve model is by far more powerful. It started to grow sales, less returns, allowances, net sales, blah, 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 provides a general guideline for the profitability of a customer, but falls short of capturing the real cost of serving. And that's where the problem lies. And unfortunately, too much stuff can get buried into the cost of sales or cost of goods sold. And it requires a hell of a lot of forensic investigation to find out, well, how much did it really cost to sell that product to a particular customer. Oh, excuse me. And again, if we look at this, the customer segmentation, we look at the most profitable, least profitable, the builds. So this is where we'd like to be. We build our customers, or engineer our customers into the most profitable. So the danger zone, as they call it here, can change the manner in which the customer interacts with the shipper to move the customers to another segment. So we have to, for example, if we're using a courier service, well, maybe we can use snail mail. We can use an alternative system, piggyback on something else. Then we move them out of a danger zone because they become less costly to serve. But if you have a direct courier system to the door to door for some particular items, then they might not be lucrative enough. And particularly if there's a high frequency, then you might say, oh yeah, but look, they buy so many items every week, and say, well, hang on a second, this other customer down there buys bulk items once a month, and it's worth a while to ship door to door for that customer. But serving to Mark there, and he orders every second day. It's our cost to serve is I won't say quadrupled. It could be many times that, but the return on the unit cost is becomes ridiculous. So into the least profitable. So we try to say, is there a cheaper way of serving that customer? If not, then I was going to say get rid of the customer, but put in the very basic levels of service, snail mail, whatever the case may be, national post, on post. Nothing wrong with on post. They're fine. The build segment, and then of course the cost engineering segment strategies aim to find more efficient ways for the customer to interact with the shipper. What I said at the very top in the previous, what kind of a web interface your CRM system has, or what kind of touch points your CRM system has. It doesn't necessarily always have to be web. And then of course the order management execution order, so the order to cash versus the replenishment cycle. So really, outbound to customer shipments, so the order to cash or order cycle is all of the activities that occur from when an order is received by a seller until the product is received by the buyer, plus the flow of funds back to the seller based on the invoice. So the total cycle: order comes in, products manufactured, goes through all the process, shipped out to the customer, and the money is transferred, or the invoice, credit terms, generally speaking. Most of our purchases online will be immediate, so there is no wait. In actual fact, there is a slight wait while they verify your account and they actually get the funds, and you get a verification number to say, yes, your funds have been transferred, now we can proceed with the order, blah, blah, blah. So the replenishment cycle, so the term replenishment cycle is used more frequently when referring to the acquisition of additional inventory, as in materials management. So how quickly can we replenish based on the purchases from the multiple OTCs, if you follow me, multiple purchases, how quickly we replenish our stock. So basically one organization's order cycle is another's replenishment cycle, essentially. Now here's just the what you call a version, the breakdown according to the score model. So you can see now already you have the different levels of the information flow, product flow, cash flow, but here are the processes. So reading your process inquiry and a quote, going into receive an entry for a valid order, and so on. So your flow starts down there, and this is the flow backwards towards the company, and eventually you sell your product out there and you have an invoice, and then you'll have a 30-day credit. So you'd have other processes, financial processes tied into the back of this, of course. But at least it gives you a flow. It's like a flow diagram. That's exactly what it is, of the processes, generic processes, according to score. And here you have, if you look at before we make any kind of system changes, before we move to any of these cost to serve bases, if you do it, these are like tolerances or performance measurements. This is what you'd get in the likes of Six Sigma and so on. You have the median, and then you have the upper and lower limits, as with any quality cycle as such. So ideally, we'd like to be hitting our targets here all the time, but you have these outliers, or the mean distribution of performances. So you have order placements before any system changes versus after system changes. So you have order placement before you fine tune the channels. You have 1 to 5 days, say for argument's sake, or 1 to 5 hours. And now we've begun to reduce it to 3 days. We've made the system more efficient. Order processing, going all the way down here, order preparations. So the key point is looking at, although these might look similar, as you can see, from 0 to 4 days for order shipment. That is reduced now from 1 to 3 days. And then we take the total order cycle, taking all of these, the aggregate of all of these distribution charts, and you can see here that average 13 days, range 4 to 22 days. And once we made system tweaks, fine tunes, improved process at various sub levels, we've gone from that, we brought it down to 11 days. So what does that do for you? You turn around the order, so you're getting 2 days, you're getting cash coming into you 2 days quicker than previously. So your cash management improves because you're invoicing faster, for example, and so on. So the range of 6 to 10 days, or 6 to 16 days. And this becomes indicative of customer, and it boosts revenue. So because you're becoming more efficient, you're able to produce more quantity of product, technically, and improves the bottom line, essentially, your cash flow. Okay, where are we going now? I think the next one. Right, second break of the night. How are we doing time wise? It's now 10 to 9. We shall reconvene at 9 o'clock and wrap this out then at that stage in the last half hour. Okay, doke, folks.
So,
Rightio, folks. See you then. I'll split this into 3 parts for the moment. Now, back again for part 3 of the marathon. Oh dear. This is even tiring me out. Anyway, where was I? Right, I was about to start into the last leg of this, customer service. So let's power on. We're nearly there. We'll be finished by 9:30. Oh, God willing. Where's this going? Here we are. Right, so the customer service side. So we've had the order management, now the customer service side. And so if we look at this, I should say a generic diagram or schematic of the marketing objective and the logistics objective. And fundamentally, when we pull these two together, we end up with the total costs, or the transportation costs, plus the warehousing costs, plus order processing, plus information costs, plus the lot quality cost, plus a quantity cost, plus the inventory carrying costs. And they're just to name some of them. There's a lot more, generally speaking. But if you look up here, allocate resources to the maximum, or to the marketing mix, to maximize the long-term profitability of the firm itself. So again, allocating resources. So your marketing mix is what? Any suggestions what the marketing mix might be?
7 Ps.
Very good. Thank you very much. I think that was Emma, wasn't it? Yeah. So 7 Ps: product, price, promotion, and place, physical evidence, people, and processes. And that's the servicing side of it. So the traditional 4 Ps don't really exist much nowadays. It's the full gambit of the 7 Ps: physical evidence, people, and processes. And it becomes almost self-explanatory then, the processes, in other words the channels, for example, of how we deal with customers at the customer touch points. Okay, so you have those up there, you have the product, price, promotion, and place, and then you have all this other stuff behind. So it's missing those 3 elements in this. Well, it's inherent in this diagram here, where you would have the service elements, the extended 3 Ps. So of course we have to be realistic about this, because what happens here, you end up with the law of diminishing returns. Suppliers must recognize the importance of balancing the trade-offs between service levels and the cost of providing that service to the customers. So again, if you take the extreme examples, either you take it in traditional posts or we give you door-to-door service. Now, if you were to try and run door-to-door service on every product that you produce and so on, so it becomes financially disastrous, obviously, but you won't get any further benefits. So again, we have only through segmenting our customers, both from the channels, the profitability, and the cost to serve, then we can start to look at what we invest and how we invest in each of those channels, so to speak. And then we can underpin that by our activity-based costing on the cost to serve basis. Then we can see what the return on our investments are. So a return investment, you could be collaborating, or you might have a partner, a third-party logistics service provider, partner with them, and through them you'll determine what is the most profitable and cost-effective way of delivering your products to various segments of customers. So they'll be gathering quite a lot of data. So of course, based on what they have and their networks and their capabilities and so on, you can identify your cost to serve elements or costs for each segment, and then evaluate, how, obviously, the return on each investment. Should we expand or try and move? Sometimes the return investment might be a case where you're trying to, how would you say, coerce customers into waiting for 2 extra days or an extra week and so on, because we have bulk shipments, and it could be more cost beneficial to them in terms of the unit price, if they're willing to consolidate orders, for example, and just wait that little extra bit of time. So we can actually see, for the customer's perspective, if we can migrate them onto that kind of a model to wait for consolidated shipments. Therefore, the cost to serve, we can see how much it's benefiting us or not. So we might have to invest time and effort into converting the customers from one channel to a next, or deciding based on your segmentation to close down certain channels to customers and say, well, if we migrate them across, what's the cost to us if we do this? We might lose customers because they've become quite comfortable and settled with the way we have been serving them up to now, and might not like the change and might look for alternative suppliers. That trade-off could be, would of course be one of the elements you consider. Well, okay, we're going to lose 5%, 10% of these customers. However, we're now moving them onto a different arrangement or a different agreement. This is reducing our costs, so one outweighs the other. Therefore, you can see very clearly the cost of investment and the impacts. But you'll go on a step further and say, well, were these customers potentially going to move on to? Could we have moved them onto a different plan or lose them totally? Again, that will come down to the profitability, the convenience of serving those customers, and so on. Now, again, from the elements of the customer service, if we look at it here, convenience, time, dependability, and communication. Where do you see these coming up before? Very similar to your generic objectives. But the absolute length of the lead time itself, so the time the order was placed to the time the customer has actually received it, that's the absolute length of your order, and that's a key metric. There's a whole lot of other stuff, but broken down into it. But that's your key metric: cost to serve or length of time, dependability, lead time, safe deliveries, correct orders, and all of that. Getting it right, in other words, trying to implement as much of the 7 R's from memory as possible. On time, right product, right place, right quantity, blah, 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 right quality, and so on. Pre-transaction and transaction and post-transaction communications, your order tracking, for example. Is it practical for depending on the type of order, the size of order, the frequency of the orders themselves? But fortunately, the technology has become relatively inexpensive to provide that kind of luxury to customers in terms of tracking their orders. And as you know, some customers just like to see, well, where is it now? Where is it now? Yeah. As you remember, Henry Kidd, are we there yet? Are we there yet? But nevertheless, they like to see something, so it reinstills a level of confidence in you as a supplier to the customer when they have some visibility of what's happening.
Do you typically see that sort of level of track and trace in reverse logistics as well?
No, that's a good point, Colin, and I can put my hands up and say I haven't seen that level.
I've seen it myself, that's why I was wondering.
You know, and that's why I think there's a tremendous opportunity there, to look at that technology and literally just adapt what's already existing and just map it back on an inwards basis. You know,
It's a cost though, really. So what would be the
yeah,
value add in sort of investing in that?
exactly. And of course, you see, it depends on whether the product has been returned into you for remanufacture, reuse, or recycling, or whether it's going to another company totally as a reseller and refurbishment and so on. If it's definitely going back out to the customer, then it would be seriously from you as a supplier, it would be definitely worth looking at in terms of the turnaround times for returns to us. And I actually haven't seen it. I thought that I sing by that group, that company Otto, and their AI application and very advanced algorithms for order processing and sales. But I don't even think they've reduced dramatically the reverse logistics as an objective of their technology. By that I mean is that the problem with the online ordering systems, as I was saying, fundamentally one of the issues that this company identified was that if customers were walking down the street and saw the same products marginally more expensive, buying it there and then was more cost was satisfying them as customers, and the order they would have placed through Otto was being returned, so reverse logistics collected and on so on. So they were losing sales, and that's how they wanted to reduce this effect, to improve their delivery times and customer engagement. That's where they developed some serious, as I said, ordering stuff before you even click the button on your website. It sounds a little bit futuristic, but that's in a nutshell what they can actually do. But have the orders already kicked off, placed, and ready in transit before you've actually made the order. It sounds totally off the wall, but read the case study. It is phenomenal what they have done with it, But again, it was all based on probability stats and so on and so forth, that they were able to get that high level of confidence into their system. Because remember, their fundamental algorithm was based on the CERN Hadron Collider, one of their algorithms that were used for dispersion of I was going to say atoms, but electrons, neutrons, and all that sort. They developed one of the algorithms to be able to calculate the dispersion rates and so on of those. So they used that technique and said, well, let's, rather than being electrons and neutrons and so on, let's put customers, processes, and so on in place of those. And now let's see, can we categorize these and predict their behaviors? Basically, that's what they were doing down in CERN. That's what they've done with their online ordering and delivery service. And because their systems down there were so advanced and the AI built behind it, the predictive analytics, they were able to mitigate and reduce the returns. And it was a major, major plus to the company. improve their sales and so on, so engage as an online ordering company or sales company as such. So it's a really good case study, but I'm sure there are other ones that are similarly out there, but the technology is licensable and usable in other areas. That's for sure. It's just a clever investment.
Shouldn't businesses be more focused on getting the products right first time, kind of Six Sigma, getting out of all the faults and that, rather than focusing on, reverse logistics?
Absolutely. That would be the first commandment, so to speak. Getting it right. But the reason for example returns might be they might have gotten it right from their understanding of what the customer wants, and the customer doesn't exactly do what I really want. So I want, or I've used it this way and it wasn't intended to be used that particular way, and therefore it's broken and have to return it, or I just don't want it because it doesn't really do what I want. This is the whole point about the do you know the gap model that for products and services? There are fundamentally 5 gaps, and the different understandings of quality, and that would fall into that quality under that quality umbrella. Is it exactly what the customer wanted, and how well enough the company knows that or not? That can be a cause for a return, which then kicks off the whole reverse logistics side of things as well. So, absolutely, first commandment, try and deliver exactly what the customer, meet customer expectations, but unfortunately we don't. Things happen. And, there can be, depending on the complexity of the product itself, there can be life expectancies or inherent faults and so on in products. We often use the example of the washing machine. 5 years, one day past 5 years, bang, it packs in. Did we buy another one? Or we'll get it repaired? Most often we'll get it buy a new one and dispose of it and so on and so forth, but or sell it on or whatever for parts or whatever, I don't know. But these things happen, so products now have a life expectancy. Therefore, that in itself will kick off, even though it's meeting all the quality requirements and so on up to that point during operations. Eventually, it's we've become conditioned to know that this is going to fail. We got 5 years. Geez, that's great. Time to get a new one, or we'll be told to buy a new one. I saw great. It was one of those them and us type of comparators. What we did as kids and what the current kids do, and it was one of the issues around disposability and so on. Kids. Younger generations now will buy a new phone just for the sake of it being trendy as such. We bought a new phone when the old one broke or something like that, or we lost it or it got stolen. We didn't go out buying the latest and greatest just because we've been conditioned, and marketing has been the driver behind that. So these are all the causes as well for eventually returns and new products and replacements and taking things back and so on. So even though you're given the quality, inherently something will, it's following the customer basically. So again, lead time, frequency, distribution. So the fill from stock and then fill from back orders. That just gives an idea there, of customer service. Where do I want to go with this? Oh yes, the supply chain responsiveness, agility, supply chain costs, and so on. So again, using the metrics, backfilling the metrics that you would have defined on your score model essentially, and then we can start measuring. So obviously we have to start someplace, decide what are we going to adapt this model or elements of it. And oftentimes we might start with the whole order cycle and say, well, this is what it is, how can we improve these to compete against our competitors and offer a better level of service and so on. So fulfillment cycle can be one of the starting points and so on, and start to break it down. So this then we say supply chain responsiveness is the high level, and order fulfillment. So basically, how long is it taking us to fulfill an order? And that gives us an indicator of how responsive we are. And then of course, based on score, you can get indices of comparators with other industries or other competitors in the same industry and so on, and that can be used then to leverage your marketing campaigns. Our turnaround times are quicker than so and so, and all this sort of stuff. And then supply chain agility, upside supply chain, so your suppliers, and then customers are distribution adaptability is your channels to customers, how quickly, and downside adaptability, so how quickly we can change and respond to changes in demand from customers in terms of at the very least quantity. And again, of course, that can be impacted on the levels of reverse logistics that you may or may not have in your. And then the supply chain costs, the biggest burying ground outside the local cemetery is your cost of goods sold, and that's a serious source of data, provided it's all coded and correctly filled in and so on. But in terms of getting your cost to serve, so we can start to break it down. It's like having a complete audit trail of the costs associated with getting your order out to a customer. And then we can, I mean, it would be the starting point really for your costs based on your customers. Once you've segmented your customer, now let's pull all of these costs in relation to those customers, these types of customers, and so on, so on, so on. It would become quite complex, but at least you have ways of getting out there for a quick, what do you call them? Report generator. I can't get the names of ones. Crystal reports, for example, and go in and query these if you're not already getting them out of your SAP systems. So cash to sales cycle, of course, then, asset management. When we talk about the asset management here, we're talking about the cash cycle. Working capital flow is one of the key metrics inside an organization, and this is one way of contributing to that. How quickly you get your money in to pay for your operations. So return on supply chain fixed assets, if you have any, and then of course the supply chain reliability, the perfect order, which is the same in economics of perfect competition. It doesn't exist. It's the nirvana. We are in a kaleidoscope of imperfect competition. Of course, technically you can go down into oligopoly, duopoly, and monopoly. Rare to be on that end of the scale. For the most part, each of your companies and industries are all in some shape or form in an imperfect competitive environment. So nothing is perfectly matched. But we always try to measure towards perfect competition. Well, it's the same here. What is the perfect order? And that would fundamentally come down to exactly what each individual customer wanted and when they wanted, how they wanted, and so on and so forth. So you can imagine the mayhem in trying to achieve that level of perfection. But that said, this is why companies like the Cambridge Analyticas and their comparison sites and so on and so forth got into so much trouble. Why? Because they were able to target individual. So on one hand, we want customizable, individualistic responses, services, products from companies. And yet when we have this ability to directly market and know exactly what you're thinking and this, that, and the other thing, those companies get into trouble. Well, okay, they may have used it for other means and reasons. I ordered a piece of equipment from coming through Amazon, and it was delivered to me yesterday morning, and this I was, for whatever reason, I was over at the kitchen counter and so on. I have the Alexa Dot with the screen, you can see stuff in the cube thing, and here was this bleep came up. Your Amazon order is about to be delivered. So what how in the name of, I should look. Yeah, and then I give out about these systems listening in on what's going on and so on and so forth. Yeah, anyway, turn off the privacy settings, Mark, and cop yourself on. Well, and stop talking about people. Anyway, that's so the systems they're so well integrated. It was just a new one, caught me on by surprise that Amazon knows after feeding information out onto my network and into Alexa to tell me that the order is being delivered. I was already after getting an email and a text message, the previous day and a couple of days earlier, and up to a point where I was told that beyond this point you can't change your mind. The order is going to have to go through, and if you don't want it, you're going to have to send it back to us, but you can't cancel it at this point, which was really interesting to say that. I think it was once I got to the distribution centre in the UK. Once I got there, it couldn't be the order couldn't be cancelled or changed. Interesting, but it's a sign of times. I'm not going to banter on about this, but a stock out, the worst. That's the mortal sin of supply chain management, and they can happen. Of course, the buyer waits until the product is available, and the buyer back orders the product, or the seller loses current revenue, and the seller loses a buyer and future revenue, and so on. So as a consequence of a stock out, I mean, it's as I said, it's a mortal sin. These are the 4 possible events that might occur as a result. Fundamentally, you might lose the customer, and the cost of getting back that customer could be substantial, depending on the products and services. You know yourself. If you went down and didn't see your crunchy nuts down in Super Value from Nestle, if you're into that sort of stuff, and you found Kellogg's had crunchy nuts beside it, you might go over to them, and you might actually like them, and you might never go back to Nestle. And it's as simple as that. Nestle have lost a customer, probably forever. But that's as a consequence of stock out. That said, the stock out can have severe consequences for your organization. One of your predecessor students from years ago, from the IPMM thingy, she was telling me in Elan they ran out of rubber gloves. Everything stopped. This was before they were heavily automated. We're going back into the 90s now at this stage. No, it was. Tell a lie, it wasn't the 90s. It was 2005, I think it was, thereabouts. In any case, they ran out of rubber gloves. They were running around all the pharmacies buying up rubber gloves to try and keep production. Production had to stop as a consequence. She was mortified, but nevertheless, stock out. But more realistically, if it happens to the actual customer, it's a serious cost. So order management influences on the customer service itself. And here we have a nice little diagram. 5 major outputs of order management impacts customer service satisfaction, and the performance of each is determined by the seller's order management and logistics system. So again, here this is for all intents and purposes like your 5 generic performance objectives, and remember the polar diagrams are the spider diagrams, the same type of thing, just slightly differently represented. So as you can see here, for example, product availability will directly affect logistics information. It will also directly affect logistics operations, responsiveness, and so on. So it's just showing the interconnectivity between the order cycle, operations, post-sale logistics support, and so on, so on. So it could be installation. This would be reduced if the product wasn't available. Then of course you won't have much post-sales logistics support, because you don't have the product out there to support to have supported in the first instance, for example, and therefore the information system becomes less important, or there's less data available because you don't have product availability. So the whole point about it, but you have to balance these. You can't have, in other words, if you have too much product availability, this could put a lot of pressure onto your response. The transportation companies might not be able to get it to your customers quickly enough. So this could cause issues around warehousing and so on. So you might end up having to stockpile and then eventually cut back on production while the delivery or transportation system matches up, or your installation engineers can handle the volume of work that's coming their direction, for example. So, and all of that then can affect, if these will affect obviously the order cycle. So if these guys are overwhelmed and their booking system can't install your products because there's a delay in your operations or support, then the overall cycle time is going to be expanded. And what ends up? Not altogether too happy customers. Okay, so again, everything is a system. It's all linked. And here's an just an investment, inventory investments and the fill rate. So again, there's a point, I call it the inverse version of economies of scale. So the more you start, the higher the fill rate you want to get, the cost. So for example, you might be filling it down here, you might be using deliveries 3 times a week. Now you decide that you want to pay for a transportation system that will deliver every day. So you're going to spend, and for the sake of what? From here, from 95 to close to maybe 98%, your costs have gone up rapidly just to be able to deliver on a daily basis, as opposed to on a twice weekly or 3 times weekly, for example. So again, is it worth it? Is it worth to go for on a daily delivery versus bi-weekly delivery, for example? So you have internal fill rates, the line fill rates, product availability metrics, and that's just fill rate. If you want to try and hit the higher levels, you're going to have higher stock levels, essentially. And then here's your cash flow lost versus inventory trade-off. So the financial impact of the fill rate itself. So if you improve the order fill rate, it results in improvements in cash flow, but might require some investment on inventories and or technology. So again, you have your increasing cost of an inventory investment, including stock itself. And so again, it's exactly your economics, the minimal or the optimal point. At this level of fill rate, what's it down here, 83%, it costs $14,000. That's your optimal. After that, then you're burning cash. So if you try to improve your fill rate out to 85% or 90% out here, you go up, and your inventory costs are up here, your cash flow costs are down here. So you have a gap between your cash flow and your cash flow lost and your inventory fill rate or investment, beg your pardon. So this is your optimal. Again, plotting your graphs. You remember, you do remember economics, your supply and your demand, same idea. This is just another breakdown of the order management service, customer wait times, and so on, based on the types of metrics. And I don't know, just want to have a double check I'm on the right track with this here. Yeah, build or outsource, so ID or forecast repair, maintenance, diagnose, ID capacity, and so on, labor space. And it's the often overlooked definition of the order cycle time is customer wait time. It includes both not only order time, but also the maintenance time. Okay. To simplify that, one of the other examples I would have had on this was if you were ordering what do you call it, an air conditioning system, and suppose you order it on a Thursday and you post the order, the order comes in on a Friday morning. Someone puts it onto the system during Friday, nothing happens until Monday. Then on Monday someone comes in and say, oh, there's a new order coming in here, and then they evaluate this and they do a cost estimate of the system and then the labor required and installation time. So all of this, and these have to be booked. I have to book an installation. This is the kind of thing on a more simpler, more detailed level. But there is downtime. So the point I'm making was that from the time the order was put in on Thursday afternoon, processed on the Fridays, you've lost 12 hours by the time, most likely. And then by the time that processed on the system to being the start of the execution phase, you've lost a weekend and so on. So there's downtime. These all affect the orders and the cycle time, and as a consequence expands the order cycle time. This is basically what we're looking at here, the customer wait time or the downtime internally as well. Okay. So the concept of logistics operations responsiveness examines how well a seller can respond to a buyer's needs. This response can take 2 forms: how well the seller can customize its service offerings, and how quickly the seller can respond to a sudden change in the buyer's demand pattern. Okay. Again, you won't be able to do any of this unless you're actually tracking the data. You could do. I can guarantee you'd be tearing your hair out, if you didn't have some way of having a consistency and having the data available to you. Now, this is kind of follows on from the example where I was saying that piece of equipment I had up to a point, the option to return. So I was able to double check, was I getting precisely what I ordered. I'd go back in and was there anything I needed to change or not about the order at that point. So they were giving me a bit more time. So not only was I buying the product, which I felt I was pretty sure I wanted, but then I was given, are you sure, Mark? And I was getting this other option. And so up beyond this point, you can't make any changes, which I thought was an interesting approach. I'd never seen that before anyway, not in buying a simple product anyway. And even at that, I had a choice of, I was actually getting it through Amazon Prime, so I had a bit more flexibility on that point of it, which is another example of service levels, customer services. Do you want to use the Prime or non-Prime? In this case, I was using Amazon Prime, so there was no cost to the delivery. Now, do you think they're doing that free of charge just for the fun of it? Of course not. Their systems are so advanced, they're able to aggregate the loads and consolidate and still say that this is not going to charge. Or maybe based on the size, we can pack that into something else and get it there pretty quickly. It's a small item, small ticket item, as you might refer to it as. So influence on customer service, so logistics operations responsive metrics. So you have delivery agility metrics, so upside delivery ability, downside ability, and flexibility. Kind of what I just delivered, the upside delivery flexibility, at which point you can return, not return, change your order, cancel your order even. And then the customization of the customer, so the time it takes the seller to offer a new package for sale in the retailer's stores. Okay. So offer a new package. That's a little bit arbitrary there. How best to interpret that? It's not the same as mass customization. It could be a case of where you're ordering the product and you're in the actual store and you can make fine tune or adjustments to the product, at the service at the counter itself, for example, or say, well, I don't really need the stand for this, I have one already, so you can hold on to that and maybe get a reduction for it. Or I don't need the laptop case, I'll just take the laptop as is. Or I don't need the packaging that came with it. It could be something as simple as that in terms of the last minute customization metrics. What are the customers? And again, you pick this, you probably find that, our delivery system right up to the actual retail desk is solid, therefore we don't need to have the packaging. So we can give the customer the option of buying packaging or not, as opposed to coming and refusing to take it. For example, it's a long stretch, but nevertheless that can be the case. And what else have we got here? These are critical sets to order management. So the information system, I'm not going to go in there because I've been saying so many times, unless you have the systems in place and the ways of trapping the metrics, your information system, then you're not going to be able to get the data to develop your strategies, your investments, your changes, your adaptabilities, your responsiveness, and so on, unless you have the data. And this is just an example of it. Transportation activity, pre-trans, trans, and post-trans, the freight bill, carrier performance, proof of delivery, claim information, and so on. So all of these associated, triggered elements of the order processing itself. And yourselves, if you buy something again online, you'll get the email, product has been delivered, did you receive it or not? And click yes or no. And if you say no, they'll come back to say, we have proof. And even now, they can still prove it even though you don't sign for it. I had an engineer out looking at some systems here, and he was actually taking a photograph, saying, the level of service and the product you're using is performing to blah 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 standards and so on. Even though and one of my PCs might not be doing that, it's he was saying, you look for yourself. So he took a photograph of it to say, job done, completed the service, and there's no arguing with that kind of thing. But they're the kind of things that companies are putting in place to guarantee the transaction or post-transaction. So most metrics involved in the information systems address how accurate and timely the data are to allow a decision to be made or an activity to be performed. So again, your forecasting, your inventory, your data integrity itself is important. So testing and verifying testing. So again, when you're rolling out these systems, the robustness of your processes and the software and the data and verifying the data and so on and so forth, you'll obviously have to test it. And then over time, as you begin to spot trends, categories and indices fundamentally leading to trends, then you have far higher levels of predictability. Then you're getting into realms of really advanced systems where you can actually now guarantee and you can promote to your customers performances based on past events and so on. So unlike the banks. Anyone in the banks now? I'm not insulting them. Oh, Jesus. Whereas past performance do not, in this case, it most certainly does. Past performance do dictate how future performances will be. So the two forms of post-sale logistics support: the management of product returns from the supplier, reverse logistics, and then the delivery and installation of the spare parts, your reverse logistics in either case. Okay, so well, the spare parts, you wouldn't be installing spare parts unless there was an issue with the original piece of equipment, which means there's an element of the reverse logistics service coming in here. So you have you might not be physically sending back a product, but you're offering a maintenance type facility. And again, that might be done through collaborations, partnerships and so on with local companies, local experts and so on, to enable you to offer the level of service that the customers expect or that you promised in the first instance. So there's no point in having an engineer sitting in Mayo and you need to service a machine down in the back end of Italy. Hire a local bloke and so on. That kind of approach. So for the most part, the PLS logistics partners, third-party logistics services that manages product returns is measured by the ease with which customers can return a product. And again, if you provide all the packaging, provide the labeling for them, you're making it easy for them. The chances are that that's not inviting customers to say, oh yeah, return it now. We're giving you all the packaging and the labeling and we're paying for the free post and all that sort of stuff. Or there is no charge. That's not a license for people that just want to return. They're doing this on a calculated basis. We know that the probability of a 5% return is maybe 3%. So they say that we know that this is going to cost us X. That's how they're able to say, well, we'll take the returns, we'll pay for all of this, because they know the probability is extremely low. And finally, into service recovery, you'll be delighted to know how we done time-wise. Oh, Jesus. Service recovery, measuring, anticipating, and developing. So the key aspects of the recovery. Service recovery requires an organization to realize that mistakes will occur and to have plans to fix them. So to answer your question earlier on there, was it Neil? Yeah, even though you're aiming for high quality, perfect order and so on and so forth, things can go wrong. Products can be just not meeting precisely the customer's expectations. So this is where we have to have our service recovery. Take back the product, fix them and modify them, whatever needs to be done to meet exactly the customer's expectation. So measuring the cost of poor service, anticipating the needs for recovery, and then developing employee training and empowerment. Not the call centers where you would say, sorry, you can't do this, and they're following a script. It's empowering the customers and call centers to make decisions locally. Because why? They're a direct customer touch point. Okay. And that's it, folks. I'm not even going to read the summary. It's 20 to 10, and I'm talked out. Any questions? Comments? Insults? No, I don't want any insults. But I will take jokes, though.
Been a long night. I think
It has been a long night. I did say that we were going to be moving at pace, so to speak, It's kind of the sign of things to come. We'll be rocking now, as we say, for the next few sessions. And I don't see you next Wednesday, as far as I know, but I see you Saturday week, according to my schedule, and then the following Wednesday, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything I need? I'm going to look at the volume of stuff that we're going to go through. Let me think about it. I might pre-record some stuff and make it available so that we have a little bit more breathing space during the actual lectures themselves. For the moment, we'll carry on as is. Okie dokie, folks.
All right.
Man,
Okay,
thanks,
good
Mark.
night.
Radio, folks. Take it easy. God bless. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.